According to multiple reports, the NBA trade market is already starting to heat up. And that's not just important for the Lakers, but for nearly every team that believes it can compete, especially teams that have clear roster holes and understand that standing still is the fastest way to fall behind. For the Lakers, that reality is pretty straightforward. They don't have just one issue, they have a few. But there is one hole that stands above the rest, and it's something most people would agree on. Reliable, two-way 3-and-D talent. That's been the biggest weakness on this roster, actually, and it's exactly the type of player that becomes available when the trade market opens up. What makes this deadline different is timing. Reports suggest that players across the entire spectrum, from star-level names to high-end and even lower-end rotation players, could be available as early as mid to late December. That opens multiple paths for improvement, whether it's a direct trade, a multi-team deal, or even capitalizing on the aftermath of another trade where a player suddenly no longer fits his new situation. The Lakers have options. And this season, more than most, there appear to be a lot of sellers. Several teams are already shifting toward tank mode, looking to offload talent in exchange for draft compensation, younger players, or financial flexibility. That kind of environment is exactly where smart front offices can find value, especially if they're focused on fit rather than name recognition. So yes, this is a legitimate opportunity for the Lakers, but the bigger question isn't whether they should make a move. It's which moves actually make sense, and just as importantly, which ones don't. That brings us to the first name that surfaced in recent reports, DeAndre Hunter. Hunter is a familiar name in Lakers trade conversations. In fact, he's been linked to this team at nearly every deadline for the past few years. And there's history there. The Lakers technically selected him 4th overall in the 2019 draft before that pick became part of the Anthony Davis trade and eventually landed with Atlanta. Now, years later, Hunter once again finds himself in trade rumors. Statistically, he's having a down year. He's averaging around 15 points per game, but the efficiency has dropped significantly, shooting roughly 43% from the field and just over 30% from three. That's a noticeable decline from last season when he was far more efficient from both areas. On top of that, his current team is in a complicated financial position. Sitting deep into the luxury tax and over the second apron, any trade involving them becomes extremely restrictive. That alone makes negotiations difficult, and any deal would likely require precise salary matching and follow-up moves just to stay roster legal. Hunter, at his best, fits the archetype the Lakers need. But his inconsistency, salary, and the complexity of dealing with a second apron team introduce real risk. It's not an impossible fit, but it's far from a clean one. And importantly, he's not the only name that needs to be evaluated, because there are other teams and other situations that might present far more practical opportunities. That situation in Indiana has also opened the door to another intriguing name, Benedict Mathurin. According to reports, Indiana has made it abundantly clear that Mathurin is available on the trade market. The Pacers are reportedly unwilling to commit to a 9-figure extension, which signals that while they value him as a player, they may not see him as a long-term core piece going forward. With the team effectively treating this season as a step-back year, it's not surprising that his name is being discussed in trade conversations. On paper, Mathurin is easy to like. We're talking about a young athletic guard who's only 23 years old and currently having the best season of his career. He's averaging nearly 20 points per game, along with solid rebounding and playmaking numbers. His efficiency has also taken a real step forward, shooting in the mid-40s from the field, close to 40% from three, and nearly 40% on corner threes, which is a career high. From a purely offensive standpoint, there's a lot to appreciate. The Lakers are not an especially athletic team, and Mathurin would immediately add burst, rim pressure, and shot making to the rotation. That part of the fit is obvious. The issue comes when you look beyond the box score. Despite the athletic tools, Mathurin has never been a consistently committed defender. His career defensive metrics reflect that, and the eye test confirms it. He tends to prioritize scoring over taking on difficult defensive assignments. And while there have been flashes, including moments during Indiana's strong playoff run last season. Those moments have never translated into consistent two-way impact. That matters because the Lakers don't need another scorer. What they need is someone who can defend at a high level every night, communicate on that end, and still knock down open threes without demanding touches. Mathurin, at least at this stage of his career, profiles more as a one-way offensive player than a true two-way wing. There's also the contract incentive to consider. If Mathurin lands on a new team, he'll be playing for his next deal. That usually means leaning into offense even more, not suddenly becoming a defense-first role player. Expecting him to transform into a legitimate 3-and-D option would be a major projection, not a certainty. Then there's the cost. Given his age, production, and upside, Indiana would almost certainly demand close to a first-round pick, even if the package is built around expiring salary. For the Lakers, using their most flexible tradable pick on a player who doesn't clearly solve their biggest weakness would be a questionable decision. So while Mathurin is an interesting name, he doesn't feel like the right target. That brings us to a very different situation, one that may be far more realistic. In Toronto, roster construction and financial pressure are starting to collide. The Raptors already have massive money committed over the next 2 seasons, with Scotty Barnes, Brandon Ingram, Emmanuel Quickley, R.J. Barrett, and Jakob Poeltl all locked in. That's well over $100 million committed for next season alone, and that's without a full roster filled out. Because of that, Ochai Agbaji has emerged as a likely trade candidate. According to league reports, rival executives believe Agbaji is one of the most realistic moves Toronto can make to stay under the tax. There have even been discussions involving Agbaji and a second-round pick simply to move his salary, a clear sign that the Raptors are motivated sellers. That's exactly the type of situation the Lakers should be monitoring. Agbaji fits the archetype they've been searching for: young, athletic, low usage, capable of defending on the perimeter, and comfortable spacing the floor. The challenge, of course, is logistics. His $6.3 million salary doesn't cleanly match most Lakers contracts, meaning any deal would require creativity or additional pieces. But compared to the risk profiles and costs of other names on the market, this is the kind of opportunity that makes sense. A player whose value comes from fit, not hype. Biggest complication in any potential deal with Toronto is the financial side. Both teams need to remain below the first apron, which severely limits how a trade can be structured. There simply isn't a clean, one-for-one move that works while keeping both teams compliant. Because of that, any realistic deal would almost certainly have to involve a third team, and possibly even become a more complex, multi-layered trade. That's where a team like Brooklyn could come into play. A framework could look something like this. Ochai Agbaji ends up with the Lakers, Toronto receives a low-cost young player or minor asset simply to get something in return, and Brooklyn absorbs salary as part of the process. Gabe Vincent could function as salary filler, with minor draft compensation included to balance things out. The exact pieces can change. This is more about illustrating the concept than locking into a specific proposal. The key point is this: it likely wouldn't take much. Toronto's willingness to attach a second-round pick just to move Agbaji in other discussions tells you everything you need to know. They're not trying to extract maximum value. They're trying to avoid losing him for nothing. That alone creates an opportunity. And while Agbaji is having a down year statistically, context matters. He's shooting poorly this season, barely cracking 20% from 3, but he's also playing limited minutes. Nearly half of what he played last year. That kind of usage fluctuation often coincides with a drop in rhythm and confidence, especially for role players. When you zoom out and look at his full profile, the appeal becomes clear. Last season, Agbaji averaged double-figure scoring, grabbed 4 rebounds per game, shot 50% from the field, and around 40% from 3, all while consistently guarding the toughest perimeter assignments. That's the version that matters, not a small sample down year in a crowded rotation. He's 25 years old, athletic, low usage, and fits the timeline of a Luka-centered roster perfectly. For a team that desperately needs real two-way wings, this is exactly the type of buy low opportunity worth pursuing. At this point, he's arguably the best fringe-level trade target currently available, realistic, affordable, and role appropriate. But if that opportunity doesn't materialize, or if the Lakers decide to pivot elsewhere, another familiar name continues to surface: Andrew Wiggins. According to recent reports, Miami has once again gauged the trade market for Wiggins, something they've been quietly doing for months. At various points, the reported asking price has been significant, including rotation players and draft capital. That's not cheap, but it reflects the scarcity of legitimate two-way wings around the league. For the Lakers, the appeal is obvious. Wiggins provides size, defensive versatility, playoff experience, and the ability to space the floor without dominating the ball. If Miami decides to fully reset or pivots toward a larger move elsewhere, Wiggins could become available, and in that scenario, he would immediately become one of the best pure fit options on the market. That said, the cost matters. This is not a move you make lightly, and it only makes sense if the front office believes he can anchor lineups defensively while complementing Luka and LeBron offensively. It's a discussion worth monitoring, but not one to force prematurely. Finally, we need to address the loudest name and the most polarizing one: Michael Porter Jr. Now, with Brooklyn, Porter is having a career year offensively. He's putting up elite scoring numbers, shooting efficiently from all areas of the floor, and doing exactly what he's always done best: score the basketball. On the surface, that kind of production is tempting. But this is where context and fit matter more than raw numbers. Porter has never been a consistent defender, and at this stage of his career, that's unlikely to change. He's a one-way player, and for a team that already has elite offensive engines, adding another scorer at the expense of defense doesn't solve the core problem. Financially, the cost would be massive. Matching salary alone would require gutting expiring contracts, and Brooklyn would almost certainly demand draft capital on top of that. That's a heavy investment for a player who doesn't address the Lakers' biggest weakness. He has the name, he has the scoring, but he doesn't have the two-way impact this roster needs. When you step back and look at the full picture, the pattern becomes clear. The Lakers don't need flash. They don't need volume scorers. They need defenders who can shoot, not shooters who occasionally defend. And with that, we've covered the full range of recent trade reports: DeAndre Hunter, Benedict Mathurin, Ochai Agbaji, Andrew Wiggins, and Michael Porter Jr. All names mentioned in trade rumors, all very different fits, and all carrying very different levels of risk. So now the question goes to you. Which of these moves actually makes sense? Which ones would you stay far away from? And is there a name we haven't talked about that you think the Lakers should target? Drop your thoughts below. I'm curious to see where you land. That'll do it for this one. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you in the next breakdown.